Hello, fundraising friends. Thank you for joining me today for our latest Coffee with a Consultant. Hope everybody's got your cup of coffee ready to go this morning. I have had probably too much caffeine today, but it'll make sure that I'm sharp and ready to talk to you about how to talk to a grant administrator to improve your grant requests. And this is one of those things that if you are a new grant writer or even sometimes a seasoned grant writer, it can be pretty intimidating to reach out to a grant administrator. And it's one of those things where it's like, it feels like they have all the power, they have access to the funds that you need and you want for your nonprofit organization. So it can be a little bit nerve-wracking. And you want to make sure that when you get somebody on the phone or responding to an email, that you make the best use of that time. So let's talk first about what a grant administrator is. So a grant administrator is someone who works for, or in some cases, depending on the organization, volunteers for a foundation, a private or corporate foundation. And there are grant administrators for federal and state grants as well. Those are different conversations, and usually they put this information out there. So today we're going to focus mostly on private and corporate grant administrators. So these are individuals that work for or volunteer for a role where they are going to be interacting with nonprofit organizations and grant writers, nonprofit fundraising professionals to share the funding priorities of the foundation for that year or that grant cycle, and talk to you about ways that can help improve your likelihood of receiving a grant. So it's a really valuable resource that these organizations provide. And sometimes grant writers don't even know that that's an option. They can also serve as a champion for your organization. If they get to know what you're doing and they feel like it's a good connection to the foundation's funding priorities for that cycle, then they may take that information that they've learned and go to the review committee or the board and say, yeah, this is really what you're wanting to fund this year, and help move your application through the process. And again, increase your likelihood of a successful grant request. But what do you say when you get the grant administrator on the phone? Or you can also translate a lot of this over to email. But it can be challenging, first of all, to get somebody on the phone, especially, kind of since COVID, everybody's running a little bit more lean. And so sometimes grant administrators may be just responding via email. You may get a form letter back. In some cases, I have gotten a response that says, refer to our website. So, you're going to get a combination of both. I've had some grant administrators that have scheduled hour-long calls with me, and we go into really fine detail about the application and the process and our request and our program. So, that's ideal, but you're not going to get that every time. So how can you, again, make the best use of that time? So where do you find out who the grant administrator is? So my first checkpoint is the website. Hopefully they'll share that information. If they don't, they may have a general email address that you can reach out to, or a general phone number that you can call. It's always best to get an individual's name. That makes it so much more personal in the conversation. So one way to do that is to look up their IRS Form 990. That information should be listed on there. It's usually in about section 16. I've been doing this for a really long time, so I can kind of scroll down to that exact spot where they will tell you the process for submitting an application, what their requirements are, and the person to whom you should address the application. In some cases, that's an executive director. So that may not be who you want to talk to, but they should reference a grant administrator if they have one. So you want to introduce yourself to that person, let them know your title and your role at the organization, and then tell them why you're calling. Just share with them that you'd like to ask a few questions about the foundation, about the grant cycle, and see if they can share some updated information with you about the guidelines. Next, if you've had someone on your board or a volunteer or a staff person at your nonprofit that has a connection with that foundation that has said, yeah, go ahead and reach out to them and use my name. First and foremost, you want to get permission to do that first, but show them that connection and say, Melanie Lambert recommended that I reach out to you today and talk to you a bit about our program because she felt like it would be a good match for your funding interests. Make that connection. And again, that makes it less of a cold call situation. Then you want to briefly describe your organization and your need. And this should be like your elevator pitch. Nothing too dramatic. Don't get into too much of your history. Just give them enough information so that they have the ability to ask you some questions. And then that'll lead into a really natural conversation between the two of you. One thing that's really important in both a grant application and in this conversation is to reiterate that mission alignment between what you do and what they want to fund. That's really grant writing gold. When you can make that connection and say, you want to fund this and this is what we do, you're less having to convince them, right? And just by going through your programs and describing the people that you serve or the mission of the organization, they're going to see that. But being very candid about it and making it a very blatant statement can be really helpful. So you want to also talk to them about, this is why I've reached out to you. I've reached out to you because our missions align, but also because you funded organizations that are similar to us before, or you've funded similar programs. Just to, again, establish that connection and the rationale as to why you are connecting specifically with them. And that can be really helpful for a grant administrator too, if he or she is taking notes and may, as I said, may be able to champion your cause. That could be a good little, brief description for him or her to share with the review committee. So you're also going to want to ask some questions and get some information from them. And they may naturally answer these questions in a conversation with you. But these are the things that you're going to want to look for based on what they share, or you're going to want to ask them. So one of the things that is most important to me is to kind of reiterate a little bit about what I've shared and then be very specific in asking, do you feel that an application from us is appropriate right now? Now, they may say, yes, send in your application. We can't wait to see it. Can't wait to share it with the review committee. And they may say that right now is not the right time. So in those cases, I would ask a follow-up question and just say, when do you feel like would be an appropriate time for us to submit? And they may flat out say, not right now. We're not funding that right now. We're looking at other priorities, or we've expended all of our funds for this grant cycle. Come back next cycle or next year. So you're going to want to take note of that and make sure that you move forward under the guidance that they provide as the answer to that question. If they do provide you with a yes, go ahead. You'll want to verify their deadline. So this can change even with using, I use a lot of the online databases to research grant opportunities. So even with those that are working to provide the most current information, some things can be a bit out of date. So just yesterday, I found one that was showed a date of May 15th, and it had been updated on their website that the date was now September 15th. So you want to verify that with them when you get the grant administrator on the phone, and just, make sure that you have at least the next grant cycle deadline. And you may also want to find out when the following one is, just in case that next one isn't something that's doable for your organization, or that's not relevant based on your funding need. Another thing that I feel like a lot of new grant writers feel a little apprehensive about asking, but to me, it's always worth it, is, are you available to review our proposal before submission? This has become fewer and further between in the last 10 years or so of grant administrators being willing to do that extra step for you. But to me, it's worth asking. And if they say no, you just move on. If they say yes, that can be a huge bonus to get you that kind of internal perspective, that inside set of eyes that can provide you with feedback. Now, you want to make sure that your proposal is as ready as you can get it to submit before you do that. You don't want to have any errors in there that they're going to spot, any typos, any gaps in your content. You want to make sure that on your side of things, you're ready to hit submit. You also need to be very conscious of their time. You don't want to send in an application for them to review within 2 weeks of the deadline, because they've got a lot on their plate at that point, and that would just, it probably wouldn't happen for you. So you're going to want to back up your process if they say yes, and make sure that you've built in that time. But it can be very valuable if they are willing to offer that as a resource. And then another really important question is to ask them if they can advise you on an appropriate ask amount. So you can go onto the 990s and you can see their previous giving history, and you can see other types of programs they funded that are similar to yours, and get an idea. And there's also some of the research databases that you can find that will provide you with just a general, this is what their typical grant amount is, or their median grant amount, or this is what they fund for new requests. You can get that from those portals, but it's always good to get it directly from the grant administrator if you can. So he or she can have heard about your program and know the specifics, and then share with you what ask amount that they feel that the board would be comfortable in funding if they moved forward with an award. And I've had this range vastly different from what I've been able to find online. So it is really valuable. I had an organization a year or so ago that I was working with, and we anticipated a $50,000 one-year ask. And the grant administrator said, no, absolutely move forward with a $150,000 ask over 3 years. So that was not something that we knew just from reading their profile or looking at their 990 that they were willing to fund something over the course of 3 years. So that really helped us and helped us expand our request as well. We actually went in a different direction, slightly different direction from what we anticipated, based on our ability to ask for a little bit more than what we had anticipated. Another question that kind of can fall to the wayside and be forgotten is to ask the grant administrator if they're aware of any other foundations that may be interested in partnering with your nonprofit and supporting your requests. The foundation and philanthropic world, it feels huge when you're writing grants and you're doing research, but it can really be a small world, particularly if you're looking at local funding from private and corporate foundations. They may be able to say, yeah, check out the XYZ Foundation, and I've got a connection there, and I'd be glad to make an introduction for you. They're not in competition with each other. They all want to make a difference in the world. So if there's an insight there that you can get without having to do another one of these cold calls, that's very valuable. They may say no, and then just move on. And then this doesn't come into play as often as it used to when we were sending paper proposals, a lot more frequently than we are now. But you'll want to ask if they require paper proposals, mailed copies, how many copies do they want? Particularly if it's a smaller family foundation. In some cases, they are spread out all over the place. Everybody has the ability now to work remotely, even private foundation staff or volunteers. So the review committee may be spread out all over the place, and there may be one grant administrator who's sending that application to 7 or 8 different people. So you just want to ask, and out of courtesy, provide that as an option that you can send more than one copy, and maybe save the grant administrator a step in the process. And then ask them if there's anything else that they can share with you that would be helpful. In some cases, they may recommend that you wait till another grant cycle, and that might be something that may not have come up in conversation, but just giving them the opportunity to use their expertise on their foundation and the giving history and the funding priorities for the next grant cycle, it can garner you a lot of information that you may not have known to anticipate. So you always want to thank them for their time as you wrap up. And again, if you're not able to get somebody on a call, you can use a lot of these questions to frame an email as well. Now, you don't want your email to be too long. I always lead my emails with, if a phone call would be more appropriate, here's a link to my calendar so they can schedule a time that works for them. so that they don't have to necessarily write back a crazy long email in response to all your questions. I condense these questions a little bit if I'm sending them via email, because again, I don't want it to look novel length. But I'm going to provide you with a free download of the questions and the discussion topics that I shared today. This is typically available in our online store at justwritegrants.com. But today, to thank you for attending our Coffee with a Consultant, I'm going to offer that as a free download, and the QR code is there in the corner for you. I hope it's helpful. One more thing that I share as kind of a bonus outside of the standard conversation starting points when we talk about talking to a grant administrator is I have in the past, I've sent a handwritten thank you note to a grant administrator, particularly that one I mentioned earlier that spent an hour on a call with me. She didn't have to do that. And she really provided me with a lot of insight that led to a successful grant request. And again, that was one of the ones that was more funding than we anticipated. A lot of changes happened after that phone call with her and what we were going to request. So she provided so much value for us. And I wanted to cultivate that relationship with her. And so I sent a handwritten thank you note. And, she never mentioned it after the fact, but I'm a big fan of doing those little things that, kind of fall outside of the norm. Everybody gets tons of emails every day and their inbox is full. And another, a email thank you note may have gotten lost in the shuffle, but you don't get much handwritten mail anymore. And so I thought it was a nice touch. And I don't know for sure that it led to our award for that request, but I don't think it hurt. And so if that's something that feels comfortable for you to do, and it's a foundation that you want to cultivate a relationship with over long term, that's just kind of my little bonus from years and years of doing this. So I hope that this has been helpful for you. Just taking 5 to 10 minutes to connect with a grant administrator can sometimes make a difference between getting a grant award and ending up at the top of that rejection pile, because just getting that information, making that connection, stewarding that relationship, all has so much value in it. And while it can be a little bit nerve-wracking to reach out and make that call, if you're prepared and you know what you're going to ask, then you feel more confident. And after you've got a few under your belt, and realize that you are the expert on your nonprofit, you are the expert on your programs and your needs, you get that little bit of confidence after you've had a really productive conversation. And then you're kind of like, well, I got to do this every time. This has been good and really helpful. So the free download on the QR code, again, includes the list of questions. It also includes a call sheet. So you can print that out. It's got headers on it where you can keep track of the funding opportunity that you're pursuing for that particular call. And you could take notes from the questions that you're asking and keep that as reference as you move forward with submitting your application. So I hope that has been helpful for you. Please let me know if you have any questions. You can use the chat function at any time during any of our Coffee with the Consultants, or you can connect with me via email, melanie@justwritegrants.com. And I appreciate you being here so much and look forward to sharing some more tidbits about grant writing and fundraising and nonprofit development with you at our next Coffee with a Consultant event. Thank you so much for joining me.